Welcome to youTurn Radio. Here at youTurn Radio, we believe in big-hearted communities and small government. Join your hosts, NADIA RENNER, Tom Murphy, and Eric Steinman, as we work to put local governments on a diet and champion the charities that support your community. So come on, join us and let's turn it around.
Welcome to youTurn Radio. Happy Thursday. Another day. Second time doing our show on a Thursday. We usually used to be live every Sunday, and now we're so excited and happy to be here on Thursdays. You can always be a part of our show and call in 909-792-5222. That's 909-792-5222. We have a great show today. The title of today's show is Picking a County Supervisor. What is legal? What is fair? Is that right, Tom?
Close. I think it's was it legal and was it fair?
True. You're right.
Yeah.
You're right.
So we're and sorry, I'm having a little bit of radio problem here. I'm not hearing myself. There we go. All right, now we're working. And actually back to the day. You know, if you spend all your time in what they call the down below area here in the, if you will, the lower levels or lower elevations of the county, I encourage everybody to get up to the desert this time of the year.
What is that?
It's beautiful.
Really?
You don't realize it, but when there's cold air like this, everything kind of sits down here on the bottom, so the air is a little hazy and that type of thing. Go up to the high desert or out to it's beautiful. You can see forever, and it's not blistering hot.
Really? That's a must.
Yeah,
I have a year out here in the Inland Empire, so I'm still learning new things and seeing new things. So I probably am one of those people that need to get out and see that. If this is your first time listening to youTurn Radio, welcome. And we also want to share that every time you call in, you get, you get a prize. And it's not just to benefit you, but also your favorite charity here in the Inland Empire. If you call in, we spin for charity. And whatever amount it lands on, we'll go ahead and donate that amount to you, right?
Yeah, and it's part of our tagline. I love our tagline, big-hearted communities, small government. And it's part of our big-hearted communities mission where if a caller calls in, contributes to the show, an opinion, whatever, we give them a chance, we spin, and whatever the number lands on, we donate to their favorite charity.
That's right. And then also if you work for one, you can call in. You could definitely call us in and let us know what you do. And the phone number is 909-792-5222. So let's get started. Let's talk a little bit about what's going on here in our county. And we have a new supervisor on the board for district number 3.
Yes,
number 3.
Yes, we do. And you start out with, okay, if a sitting supervisor leaves, what happens?
Well, I just learned that you get somebody else to fill in that seat.
Right, and it's pretty interesting because as everybody knows, James Ramos, the 3rd district supervisor, was elected to the state assembly. He moved. I mean, he didn't move, but his government job is now up in Sacramento. So there's an empty seat in the 3rd district, and you need to fill the empty seat, right?
Right. So what I've learned from that too is that you're not necessarily on a contract when you're picked supervisor, and if you happen to find another job, you could just pick up and leave, huh?
Well, and you are on a contract. You're on contract with your constituents and the people that you're representing. So you're definitely on a contract, but it's not a regular workplace contract. But so the county charter, it's very undefined in terms of how a new supervisor is selected. Basically, it says the sitting supervisors pick somebody, and they got 30 days to do it. And if they don't get it done in 30 days, choice goes up to the governor.
It was very interesting learning about this because we have 2 interviews that we'll play a little later on during the show. But I feel like I learned a lot from this part of youTurn Radio and how this kind of takes place when somebody leaves their position?
Every episode of YouTurn Radio, except for our big-hearted community episodes, every episode is a civics lesson.
Absolutely.
It was pretty interesting because the process, it was a bit rough. It was kind of like this. It was start, go, stop, reverse, go, finish, lawsuit.
Okay, repeat that one more time, but go a little slower. It was start,
go, stop.
Can we make like, okay,
reverse,
stop, like you're driving a car.
Go, finish, and then lawsuit.
I don't think
that's kind of how it worked.
That sounds like a lot of work right there, especially with the lawsuit that we'll be explaining too.
Yeah, and actually, we won't be doing a lot of explaining. Like you said, we have some recorded interviews. One with Ruth Musser Lopez, who was involved in this process as an observer, and some recorded interviews with Mayor Rigsby, the mayor of Loma Linda. Yeah, yep.
All right, so let's get into it. So, like you said, it was a start, go, stop, reverse, go, finish, lawsuit. So Ramos gets a new position, and so then the first thing that happens is people start finding out that, you know, he has a new position, and so people start sending applications.
Right, and basically the county kind of puts out, hey, you know, here's at this specific board meeting, we're going to begin to consider applications. There's a process to go through. Whereas, fill out the application. Just kind of like a normal job. Fill out an application, give us your resume, and then on this date, we're gonna interview the candidates, and then on the next date, we're gonna pare it down, and pick one.
Right.
So that was kind of the start and go part.
I mentioned that we have 2 interviews, and the questions that we asked was, how did you find out about the position? Just because, for example, I think like for myself, every time that I've found another job, every time I found another job, I usually know about the position before it's open, if that makes any sense. Especially in the radio world, you kind of like find out those things before time.
Right.
So I thought that was very interesting because I wanted to learn or know if it was kind of like the same way for supervisors.
Essentially it is, and I may be stealing a little bit of a thunder from one of the interviews, but this is and if you're in the political world and that's kind of your career track or that's what you're interested in, this is a really good job. And that's why there were, I think, like 52 applicants, actually 48 that kind of filled out all the paperwork and started the process.
How much do they roughly make about it? How much about a year?
In pay and benefits, it's about $230 a year.
$230 a year?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a really nice amount.
Yeah, that's not bad.
I'm just saying. All right, so there's 48 people it was 52, right? No, it was 52 that kind of like.
I think they started out with 52 names. A couple people didn't fill out the paperwork completely.
Right.
So they ended up with 48 applicants. And then they winnow as you kind of typically would, you kind of winnow it down to the people you want to interview. And that was down to 13. And then they interviewed those, and it was down to 5. And then the breaks went on.
All right, so that's where it started, and then that's where we get the first stop, right?
Right.
Okay, so then there's a speed bump. So in that process of those 5 people, what was the stop? What made them pump the brakes?
Well, it had to do with the winnowing process. The process that the Board of Supervisors elected to use to kind of get it down to a manageable size. Mm-hmm. In short, it was basically, if I understand it correctly, supervisors went through, looked at all the applications, and then they took their top 10. And if you're on more than one supervisor's top 10 list, if your name showed up twice,
right,
you made it through that process.
Through the first cut.
And that's where the allegation of a violation of the Brown Act came in. Our first interview, Ruth Musser-Lopez, she's a Democratic operator. She ran for California Senate, I think out in the 16th district. And basically she noticed something and, sat down, pounded out an email and said, hey, you violated the Brown Act here.
So let's go into our first audio. And this one is kind of like what I had just mentioned earlier. When I asked her, how did she find out about the position? Like I said, I've come across a lot of jobs where I knew about that position way before anybody kind of knew, and I knew that I wanted to go for that position. So I wanted to ask that.
Right, and to be clear, she was not a candidate.
She wasn't, correct. So let's play the first audio, how she says she found out about Ramos's position being available.
We had this little messenger service going on, and we have for, I don't know, a year or two now, and we go back and forth and talk about things that are going on. And it's called I just basically call it the San Bernardino County Democratic Party Strategy Team, which we call it Strategy Team. Mm-hmm. So this thing with James Ramos getting elected was really on our radar because we didn't know who was going to replace him, and we were very concerned with the fact that there were Republicans outnumbering one Democrat, Josie Gonzalez, on the board of supervisors, and so they were going to outnumber. And we were aware that it would likely not be a Democrat.
Okay, so you had an involved citizen, yes, Democrat, but they're involved. They're watching the process, so
right.
They know what's going on, and they're kind of looking at the lineup in terms of the remaining supervisors and. Hey, there's three Republicans, one Democrat, so let's maybe watch this thing a little closer.
And kind of like how you mentioned, when you're in that circle into politics, you start seeing different things that are moving or changing or upcoming things that are going to be needed, positions available, and that type of stuff. So then she pretty much found that out, and she started watching the process closely from what I took from the interview that we had with her. And then that's when she realized about the Brown Act being violated, when she starts looking at the way that everything was happening, right?
Right, and totally applaud her for that.
Yeah.
Because she's acting as a private citizen. She's, watching what's going on. Maybe has a little more background information because I think she did serve on the city council in Needles. So understands the Brown Act and would be able, if you will, to spot a violation, but very involved, and that's always a good thing.
Right. So let's play the second audio where we asked, and she pretty much says how she realized about the Brown Act being violated.
So then they decided they'd only interview those 13. Now, that next morning when they had the meeting on Tuesday, I went in and I hadn't written anything. I hadn't even opened up the Brown Act to look at it.
Right.
And what I remembered, and I was just shooting from the hip, because it was too late for me to prepare anything. But what I remembered from my training as a city councilwoman, and later on I had filed some Brown Act notices. Mm-hmm. Anyway, it wasn't that I was totally unfamiliar with it, but I just remembered polling, that this is called polling the council, when you, it's like a poll where somebody does a questionnaire, you're actually getting their answers before they deliberate. And they're deliberating and giving their answers, they're deciding, but they're not doing it in the public eye.
Okay.
So this is when they had this collective deliberation, but there was no meeting that was noticed. No, they didn't put a notification out that this was a meeting. And what it's called, when I look back at the Brown Act, then later that night, I realized, they call that serial meetings. Serial, S-E-R-I-A-L.
Okay.
Not like this kind you eat, but
right.
The one after the other.
You saw this violation, and
There's two violations. One was the serial meeting.
Okay.
That was not, in other words, polling, and that was not noticed to the public. Mm-hmm. Nobody got a notification they were having a meeting on the 10th. So there was the meeting, and then the voting itself was a violation, and they didn't vote in public. But here's the thing, when I spoke, I didn't realize that they had actually made a process on the 5th that they were going to do that. They actually met on the 5th in a legal meeting with the attorneys present, and they decided on this process.
And was that a public meeting?
Yeah.
And so
What did they say? Oh, yeah.
This is how we're going to go through the list of candidates.
We're going to each send 10 names in to the clerk.
Okay, gotcha.
This was their process. Now, at that point, that attorney should have called
Stopped them.
Yeah. And they should have stopped themselves. They should have known better that they cannot vote by sending their votes in outside of a meeting.
That was Ruth Muster Lopez, and she's pretty much explaining how the process of when she realized the process of how they were picking the third supervisor here in the county, and then she went to, and it's really explained that she went to the supervisor meeting, which are usually held on Tuesdays, and she attended that, and that's when she decided to speak up and say, hey, there's a Brown Act violation here at that super meetings that they held that day.
Right, and we should say alleged violation on that, because this is
Right.
all, to a certain extent, right now it's, he said, or it's an alleged violation. It's
Right.
not. But yeah, she kind of saw what went on. She went to the meeting and said, hey, you guys violated the Brown Act in this process.
Right. So then she goes there and she says that, but I feel it almost seemed like she didn't get the results that she wanted. And she knew about the Brown Act because she explained it. We heard her say like she's aware of it. She's worked within the government within where she understands the Brown Act. So after that, she goes home and emails them and says kind of, hey, you guys are violating the Brown Act. So let's go to our third audio.
Right, yeah.
Yeah, I went home and looked at the Brown Act, and I wrote a 3-page letter, laid it all out. And so then I delivered it to them, emailed it, and then they got it. And then the next day they were supposed to have the interviews, and they were supposed to pick somebody. That was on the 11th, but I think their that agenda item was like 3 minutes, and they basically said, and I also gave them an email that next morning too, saying I want them to. I had forgotten the words "cure and correct" when I sent that letter out, and I looked back and I said, "Oh yeah, I should tell them use that term "cure and correct" their violation." And so I wrote them an email and said, "You need to interview everybody."
So I mean, I think that's really when you really want to see a difference. Like she was really about it. She went to the district meeting. She didn't prepare properly, like she mentioned, but she still went and kind of said, you're allegedly violating the Brown Act, and then still goes home that same night, writes an email.
Yeah, 3 pages.
3 pages, like you heard. And then she writes another email that morning because then she found out what's the proper way to go about it. So she's definitely involved in trying to say, hey, what you guys are doing, calling them out pretty much.
Right, and they respond to a very an involved citizen. What she's doing, they respond.
Well, should we play audio for the response she got from the county? And also it's called The Wire, which she's going to mention, and it's The Wire
is an internal San Bernardino County newsletter, and internal to it's something that the county bureaucracy puts out.
Okay, so we're going to hear this audio number 4, where she gets the response from the county.
I did receive a letter from the county. I think it was from the attorney. And the next Tuesday, there was another county wire came out, and their public relations guy, Daryl Wirt, he puts out the notice, the supervisors are going to address the problem, the cure and correct it, by dialing back to where they were prior to taking the vote outside of a public meeting.
Okay.
So they call it dial back. It's something that they call rescinding what they did.
Okay.
So that's how their attorney or they decided that was curing and correcting.
Okay, so based on that, it sounds like her call on, hey, you guys violated the Brown Act, it might have had a lot of legitimacy to it because the county council looked at it and said, and they had a board meeting where it didn't last longer than about 2 minutes, I think, where it was basically, hey, we're not going to continue on with the interviews because we got to deal with this issue, with this allegation of the Brown Act. And then they decide basically they're going to say, we've dialed everything back. We've rescinded it.
So pretty much they're going to kind of go back and say what they did to the public.
Right.
Is what dial back means.
Right. I read the stuff. It got a little confusing, I'll say here.
So then pretty much her answer about the county being, we asked her how she felt about the county being compliant to the process.
Right. And before we play that track, this is maybe where I think it goes maybe a little off the wheels in terms of their response.
It's really hard to say.
Go ahead.
It's really hard to say they were compliant because they engaged in an act, and you can't. It's like a murder. You can't undo a murder. Now you can change the penalty for murder, but you can't undo something you already did. So I think they still have a misdemeanor violation that could be pursued.
So apparently, part of the Brown Act is there's a criminal, if you will, channel of a Brown Act violation, and you can, if you do a criminal violation, I guess it has to do with intent. If your intent is to keep information from the public, and you do so, that's a criminal violation. And it's even in the most heinous thing, I think it's like maybe a 6-month prison stay and a fine, and typically that would be imposed on an elected official that did this, egregiously multiple times. You know what I'm saying? So that's where the analogy of a of a murder seems a little. I don't know. What do you think?
I mean, I get it because it's like, hey, and especially because I feel like she's very passionate about this process. So I mean, it makes sense when you're passionate about these type of things. That's what it might look like to her. Absolutely.
Well, and I get her point. The point she's trying to make there is that if you do something, you've done it, right?
Right. It's like you committed murder. I mean, you did it.
Right. But it's I can't remember the philosophical term, but it's like a red herring. You're getting this example from way over here and are applying it to a sin, if you will. It's like, it's not that bad.
I mean, is it? All right, well, let's go to our last audio, what she kind of considers doing after this process.
What I am considering doing now, and this just happened this afternoon as I was reviewing for this interview, but there is still this other possibility of a criminal violation, this misdemeanor, because they did engage in that act.
So just then we got an update that there was a complaint filed after, like she said that when we interviewed her earlier this week, and then we've learned that there was a complaint filed after.
Right.
After we learned that, well, we interviewed her and then we learned that there is a complaint filed.
Right, and and it was not Ruth that did the filing.
Right.
Somebody heard her story, if you will, and picked it up from there. It's actually, I think the lawyers on the case. There's one. There's a shop in San Francisco. There's a shop down here that are kind of the lawyers fronting this, and then the plaintiff is I think it's Inland Empire. I forgot that, but it's a group that basically picked up her complaint and ran with it. But to a certain extent, I think so far so good. Here's an engaged citizen paying attention. She's got a little background. She kind of waves a flag and says, "Hey, we did that wrong." The county kind of hits the rewind button,
right,
and says, "Okay, here's our little bit of a do-over." And there's some urgency here because remember they got 30 days, right?
Right.
Well, 30 days. Part of this 30 days is Christmas vacation, right?
Right.
What gets done in government during Christmas vacation?
A lot of things don't get done.
I used to work for the government. Nothing.
I've never worked for the government, but I mean, just in general, I think everybody goes off during holidays for some weird reason.
So, they got the 30 days. So, Chair of the Board, Robert Lovengood, he's probably got his pedal to the metal on this thing because he wants to get it done because he certainly doesn't. It doesn't matter who's sitting in that seat, Democrat, Republican. They don't want to kick that appointment up to the state level. They don't want to let the governor appoint somebody to be a supervisor in their county, right?
Right.
So he's probably pushing pretty hard to get this done.
Right. You know what? I really got to say though, I really enjoyed, or not enjoyed, but I like the fact that Ruth Musser Lopez, who we just who we played the interview from, I like that she took action. I think that that all of us should do things like that when we don't agree with certain things or when we see that something's not done properly. And if you're that passionate, call people out. I think what she did was really cool. But we're going to go ahead and cut into a commercial break. When we come back, we have our second interview, and it's actually somebody who was part of this process who ran for supervisor. When we come back, we'll let you know who and what happened. Welcome back to youTurn Radio. Before the show, we kind of went over our interview that we had with Ruth Musser Lopez. She pretty much brought up, we got a new supervisor in the county, supervisor for the 3rd district, and she pretty much came out through the process of them picking a new supervisor and said, wait, hold on, pump your brakes. You guys are violating the Brown Act. The Brown Act, you want to kind of explain again what the Brown Act was, or should we let second guest?
Yeah, let's introduce our second guest. This is recorded, obviously, but Mayor Rhodes Rigsby, he goes by Dusty, but he's the mayor of Loma Linda. He's been the mayor for quite some time. He must be doing something right because he keeps getting reelected out there. But we sat down with him for a conversation because he was part of this process as an applicant.
Right.
And we wanted to know what it felt like from his point of view. And we asked him to explain the Brown Act, and he gave us a really good kind of short.
So we're going to play the audio where he explains the Brown Act.
I didn't hear about it. I speculated about it because knowing that James Ramos was planning to run for assembly.
Okay, that's the wrong audio, so let's play. We're live and direct. We're going to play the audio that says Brown Act, where he's going to explain what the Brown Act is. Also, if you guys want to call in and kind of like talk about the process, because it's kind of like getting a job. It's a job process. And sometimes I feel like we've experienced these type of things ourselves trying to get a job, so you can feel free to call us in 909-792-5222. That's 909-792-5222.
And we will spin the wheel for charity.
Absolutely. So let's play Brown Act where Mr. Dusty, I like Dusty. I'm going to call him Dusty.
Okay, that's good.
Where he explains the Brown Act.
The Brown Act governs the discussion process, and that requires that all meetings be noticed to the public in advance with an adequate advance notice, and that the deliberations be conducted in public.
Okay, that was pretty good.
Pretty much like the explanation. Pretty much when you're in these positions, or when you're doing anything within like the supervisors, it should be all shown to the people.
Yeah,
because practically they represent the people. So
and it's apparently it's an even more disciplined requirement. You gotta have a meeting. It's got to be an open meeting. Public has to have access to it. It has to be posted, I think, like 72 hours before the meeting, what the agenda is and what's on it. Those are the requirements. There's a couple things that that they don't have to do, if you will, out in front of the public. But that's generally what it is, and
Right.
I think it's a good thing.
So then let's get into, again, I wanted to make sure I asked this question from Mrs. Lopez's view, and then from Mr. Rigsby, how he heard about the position, because he actually ran for the position. So I wanted to see what was the difference between both and how he heard. So here we're going to play Q. How did you hear about the position?
I didn't hear about it. I speculated about it because knowing that James Ramos was planning to run for assembly and he was my supervisor, I figured there would be an empty slot, and I checked how the position was replaced and started asking questions. So yeah, I anticipated it.
So he kind of already knew, like you heard. So yeah,
Right.
that was.
And two comments on that. One is, that apparently they say politics is like it's a disease. Once you
What do you mean?
Well, once you get bitten,
Yeah.
it's like in your blood forever, type of thing. So, he's been involved in politics
Right.
for quite some time, and he knows what's going on, certainly at his city's level, but also what goes on in the county. And he knows this, he knows his job's coming up. That's the first comment. Second comment is, I wish I had his radio voice, that kind of deep. It just sounded cool.
You know what, Tom, you're doing a great job. Let's play Q1, which describes what it was like to be involved in the interview process for the county supervisor.
It was, I think, an enjoyable process. I always like the interplay of people in a political setting, so it was, for me, kind of an adventure. Nothing ventured, nothing gained. I figured there would be a lot of applicants, and there turned out to be more than even I anticipated. I thought maybe 20 would apply, and there were 52. And at that point, you have fairly low expectations, so you can just sit back and have fun.
So I thought this is very interesting because we are hearing two different voices, and when I say voices, not necessarily like her voice, his voice,
Perspectives, two different perspectives.
Right, absolutely. Like his process, he seemed to enjoy the process, like you heard, compared to Miss Lopez. She's freaking out, like this is not the right way that you guys are doing it. He's part of it, and he's saying, "Okay, I'm good. I'm enjoying the ride."
Works for me, and it's interesting. He said, it's such a big crowd.
Right.
This is just interesting and fun for me. He's also, by the way, Dr. Rigsby.
Right.
I think internal medicine. So, a very accomplished human being. And this is interesting to him. He's
Absolutely.
having a good time.
So then we asked based on the county charter, what should the selection process for an interim supervisor look like? And this is what he
the
said.
charter says that if the position is emptied by the departure, death, or election to another office of a supervisor, then there's a 30-day window for the supervisors themselves to select a replacement. And if they don't make that 30-day window, then the selection goes to the governor. And I don't think that anybody who's a supervisor would want the governor to pick their colleague. So I think the way you do it is you just arbitrarily get together and have a discussion about the various candidates and select someone. And because the charter is unclear on the process, then any process they choose is fine because they're given complete discretion by the charter.
So pretty much at that point, I learned that there's nothing really, like there's not rules and regulations at this point. So.
Right, and actually, okay, first of all, I think this is a key point in all this, is that it just says that they got 30 days to do it. It doesn't really define how they're going to do it.
Right.
Now, as they go through whatever process they come up with, there are other laws that they have to subscribe to, like the Brown Act. So you can't just say, okay, our process is to, huddle, in the chair of the board's office with no observers and take a vote. You can't do that because that's an obvious violation of the Brown Act. But they could if they could do that if they let the public in and watch them do that, because there's no defined process. Mayor Rigsby, one of the things he said, they could, if they wanted to, they could have put up a dartboard, out there in the middle of the meeting, put a bunch of names up there and.
Just kind of
could have done it.
That sounds a lot. That sounds easy compared to like actually running for supervisor. When you get in a situation like this where one of the supervisors leaves and they have to fulfill that chair.
Yeah, totally, and that's a point we'll get to maybe later on. But Mayor Rigsby made a very important point, and that is, if you're handed this job rather than having to compete for it, you become the incumbent. And we all know that the incumbent in a political race always has an advantage. So, the winner, if you will, of this selection process just avoided, $250,000 election campaign, and they're sitting in the seat, and they can spool up and run.
Right. So then we asked Mr. Dusty. The process did deliver 13 candidates for the interview, all of which were white, just 2 females, and no Democrats. So we asked them, why was that? And this is what he said.
I can't say. It's just the preferences of the supervisors. I'm not sure how many applicants were Democrats either. I don't really know. I've never seen the entire list. The closest I came to that was a publication from Yucca and Calamasa that attempted to list all of the applicants, and I never saw anything else in the press about who all the applicants were. So, whenever you have a process that allows for supervisors to select their colleague, they're going to select it their way, and second guessing it is not something that I care to engage in. Plus the fact that I made the top 25%. I made the first cut, so I wasn't going to question it.
So, that was interesting because he's obviously saying, I'm not going to question it. I think too, like just being part of the process, I think he was probably just really excited.
Yeah, our visual producer she's got this look on her face like, I didn't like that answer.
Right.
and it on one level it was satisfying to me, but on another level it really should be of, I think, great concern. Not his answer, but the slate. Now, if you go back, this was an open solicitation, if you want, if you will. Anybody who lived in the 3rd district could have applied as long as they were registered to vote and of age.
Right.
A 18-year-old kid out of high school, if they'd registered to vote, they could have come filled out the application and gone through the process. And they did that, and there was a field of 48 people that they worked through. So the question really to me becomes, this 3rd district is a fairly diverse district, I think, in terms of both ethnic background and makeup. And you kind of go through this process, and you end up with, if I counted them right, 13 candidates, all white, 2 female, and no Democrats.
You know what
what do you think?
Well, you know what I found interesting too, because obviously Mr. Dusty's a white man, but so Miss Lopez is white too. So I like, again, the fact that she's really talking about, there has to be the process. It has to be different because, even like talking right now, there's only 2 females, and most of the rest were just white, like we said.
Yeah, the other, I guess, key component of this, and I didn't look at the whole list, is who applied.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? If your pool of 48 people was, if you will, 99% white male Republicans, then that's what you're going to end. You know what I'm saying? That your selection process, you're going to end up with it. But I don't know that breakdown.
Well, then I was going to get to this second point that Ms. Lopez said. You know, they haven't. She asked for the list of who was part of the process to get picked for supervisor, and she couldn't get one from the county.
Well, I think that, I mean, there's a couple newspapers. I know it's in the Press Enterprise. I know it's in the Sentinel. The whole list, all
was there.
48 were there.
Yeah.
I didn't go through it and identify, what flavor person this was or something like that. But so I guess what I'm trying to say is two levels of concern. One is if you have this open process and you end up with this result, which we had all kind of agree is maybe not the greatest result.
Right.
How come? What was awry? Because it's an open process. What did the original applicants, what did that all look like? That type of thing. That would be kind of my concern. Not that there's anything particularly dishonest or wrong or something like that, but just structurally, that if you have an open interview thing with 48 candidates, you end up with a list that's pretty generic,
Yeah. All right, well, let's go into our fourth question that we asked Mr. Dusty. The Board of Supervisors is being sued by Inland Empire United. The lawsuit alleges that in a violation of Brown Act, the supervisors conducted a secret ballot via email and winnowed the 48 candidates down to 13 for interview. What is your opinion on this lawsuit? And this is what he said.
I'm not quite sure what the lawsuit is trying to accomplish, because the allegation of doing everything in private was cured by doing everything in public at a subsequent meeting. So once the allegations are cured, I'm not quite sure what the cause of action is at that point. So I'm questioning the lawsuit. Does it even have a cause of action? I don't know.
From your perspective, maybe there was a violation of the Brown Act, but the Board of Supervisors went back and cured and corrected, I guess is the term.
Yes, I'm a physician, not an attorney, and I know about curing things, but I don't know about legal cure. But my understanding is that the Brown Act provides for a notice of violation, a recognition of violation, and a cure of the violation, and then the cause of action disappears at that point. So okay. That's just my understanding of it.
So just like all of us in a professional setting, we make a mistake, there's an opportunity to go back and correct it.
Yes, rather than establishing damages or whatever. I don't know how I don't even know what the legal recourse is under the Brown Act. Is it everybody, if there's a flagrant ongoing Brown Act violation, does everybody go to jail, or does everybody get $1 million reward for being injured? Or I don't even, I'm not an attorney, so I don't even know what the result is of that.
I think the maximum I saw was like misdemeanor and like a short 6 months, maybe prison sentence,
and I'm not sure that it's ever been enforced to that degree, but it's there as a threat. So, yeah, and as far as what, and I just heard what happened in the public forum, that they were going to undo what they had done and start from scratch, and that's what they did. And it was a very abbreviated process, but it was in the public eye.
As a participant in the application process, would you have any complaints?
Well, I have no complaints, because like I said before, I think the charter is ambiguous enough to allow complete arbitrary selection process. Those four could pick someone who didn't even apply. They could say, oh, well, we want the mayor of Redlands to be, just pick somebody at random. There's no rule in the charter that says anything else. So they can be ridiculous if they want. They can pick someone they don't like. They can pick someone that's never applied. The only thing is that whoever they pick has to be a resident elector within the district who is registered to vote and is a resident. That's the only criterion. Don't even have to apply. You know, I look at this thing and I say it turned out pretty well. They picked a good person.
Okay, so kind of two takeaways, I think, from that clip. One is what he finished up there was, you know, as a participant in the process, he feels like it was fair, and they, you know, and they got a good result. The other, I guess, takeaway in my mind goes back to this Brown Act thing, and it's the issue of intent. And so either one of two things happened. There was an intent by the Board of Supervisors to go through that initial winnowing process in a manner that shielded that process away from the public. And if there was truly an intent to do that, then yeah, that's a violation of the Brown Act. If there wasn't intent, there's still, you know, if you will, there's still a violation, but it's a mistake, and they fixed it by basically hitting the rewind button. And saying, okay, we're going back, rewind, okay, now we're going forward again.
Right. So I also think that what he just shared with us also has to do with a little bit of this, which is the Brown Act insight that he had. And let's play that audio.
Could mention the inside track that I was given by Dennis Hansberger. He said that when he was a supervisor in the 1980s, they selected replacement for someone in closed session as a personnel matter, and that was when the Brown Act was in force. Yeah. They selected, they did this process completely behind closed doors. It has exemptions for personnel matters, real estate negotiations, legal preparation for legal work, or responding to legal challenges, and personnel matters.
This has happened in the 80s where they've selected somebody behind closed doors before.
Right, and it wasn't a Brown Act violation, and the reason is because there's three categories of actions that they, if you will, they can do behind closed doors: personnel actions, real estate, and then legal.
Right.
You know, if the county's getting sued, they can do all that behind closed doors. So in the mid-80s, they went through this process, called it a personnel matter, which may or may not be legitimate, and just did it behind closed doors, and, you know, came out with an answer.
Absolutely. If you wanted to share your thoughts on this show that we just had, you can email us because we're running out of time. But you can email us at info@youturnradio.com, and then we can play the last clip where we asked him, do you believe Dawn Rowe, which is the new district supervisor for the 3rd district, if she was selected in a legitimate legal process way?
I think so. You know, I was one of her competitors, but like I said, when you're 1 out of 52, if you think you're going to get it, that's fairly arrogant. There were probably at least half of them that I would have said are just as good an applicant as I am. You know, some people we disagree with politically, but we didn't really get into that.
So there you have it. That's what he thinks about about the new district supervisor.
Yeah, he believes the process was fair and came up with a qualified applicant to fill the seat.
Right. So pretty much, I found this show very interesting because, like we mentioned earlier, the two different perspectives were so different. And we definitely want to hear from you guys. So you guys can definitely email us, info@youturnradio.com, because this process was interesting. And you heard it from somebody that went through the process and somebody who called the county out for not doing everything in public.
Right. Which again, an involved citizen, we cheer those types of folks on. No matter the motivation, our political, I was going to say overlords, our political leadership should understand that there's an engaged populace out there that is, quite frankly, skeptical of their actions and watching them. That's not a bad thing. It's a good thing.
And so practically right now they're getting sued, right, for the Brown Act?
Right. Yeah.
So I wonder what this is going to all end and result in. I almost wish I could see, like, fast forward to see what how this is going to all end. But I'm pretty sure we'll have another show, and we'll keep you guys updated with that type of stuff.
Yeah, it's basically one of two things. The suit is successful.
Yeah.
And then it's like, okay, does it go up to the governor? Does he get to choose then, or do they get a rewind, get another 30 days and try again?
And then if that's successful, that means county's paying how much, more or less, money we're losing on another lawsuit. I'm just saying, something to think about. This was YouTurn Radio. Thank you for joining us today. We'll be back next Thursday at 3 o'clock. And you're more than welcome to follow us on our social media. You can go Instagram, youturn_radio, and that's Instagram. Or go to youturnradio.com is our website, youturnradio.com. Thank you for joining us. Till next time.